In an upscale toy store, a millionaire businessman facing financial crisis tried to buy a teddy bear for his 5-year-old daughter, who was crying inconsolably. When his card was publicly declined, the prejudiced cashier laughed loudly. The millionaire's card was declined. He froze in humiliation right in front of his daughter, who cried even harder. That's when a poor 6-year-old girl, watching through the shop window, walked in and did something that left everyone in shock. The scent of the upscale toy store was of polished wood and expensive plastic, a fragrance Arthur once associated with success, the power to simply point and purchase. Today, however, the aroma seemed to suffocate him, permeated with a silent judgment emanating from the perfectly organized shelves. He clutched the strap of his leather briefcase, the only remnant of a life where his net worth seemed infinite. The worn corners of the leather now mirrored the state of his own soul. Before him, on the gleaming glass counter, lay the Melody Bear, a plush toy with button eyes that promised solace and an internal mechanism that played a soft lullaby. It was the only wish his 5-year-old daughter, Laura, had whispered the night before, her voice so fragile it broke what little remained of Arthur's heart. He needed that bear. It was more than a toy. It was an apology, a desperate attempt to mend the absence and tension that had settled in their home like a cold fog. The sales clerk, a woman named Celeste, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, took his credit card with her fingertips, as if touching something soiled. Arthur felt a chill. He knew that look. It was the same look he received from former business partners who now crossed the street to avoid greeting him. The look of someone who knew the castle had crumbled. He had transferred the last bit of money from an emergency loan into that account, counting every last cent. It had to be enough. It had to be. Celeste inserted the card into the machine. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant melody of a miniature carousel. Arthur fixated his gaze on the bear, imagining Laura's smile, the tight hug she would give the toy. That smile was the only profit that mattered now, the only dividend that could save his soul from utter bankruptcy. He remembered a time, not long ago, when he would buy entire toy stores without even looking at the price. A time when his fortune was a whispered legend in business circles, his name synonymous with Midas. Now he was just a man praying for a single transaction to go through. The machine emitted a sharp, dry beep. Denied. Arthur's blood ran cold. There must be some mistake, he said, his voice hoarser than he intended. Could you try again, please? Celeste raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. Her smile thinned into a line of contempt. Of course, sir. She swiped the card again with a deliberate, almost theatrical slowness. This time, she didn't even wait for the result. Her eyes swept over Arthur's suit, noting the slight wear on the collar, the shoes that, though designer, needed a good polish. She already knew. The second beep, louder and more definitive, echoed through the silent store. Denied. I'm sorry, Celeste said, her voice dripping with a false compassion more cutting than any insult. It seems there are insufficient funds. An elegant couple examining a Victorian dollhouse turned. An older boy pointed. Arthur's world shrank to that counter, to that unattainable bear, and to the low, muffled chuckle that escaped Celeste's lips. Humiliation. It was hot, heavy, suffocating him. He was paralyzed, a dethroned king in a toy store, the phantom of his former wealth mocking him. And then, through the pristine display window, he saw a pair of large, curious eyes observing the scene. A little girl, in a patched-up jacket and a smudged face, stood outside in the cold, and she had seen everything. Time seemed to stretch and fold in on itself. For Arthur, each second under those curious gazes was agony. Celeste's chuckle, though brief, echoed in his mind, a cruel sound that stripped him of his dignity. He, who once commanded boardrooms with a single word and moved millions in investments with a stroke of his pen, stood there, exposed and helpless, all for a teddy bear. His immense fortune, now reduced to a bitter memory, couldn't even provide a moment of joy for his daughter. He felt his face burn, a wave of shame so intense it made him dizzy. Instinctively, he turned to leave, to flee that stage of his personal misery. He would leave the bear behind, invent an excuse for Laura, say the store was closed, anything to avoid admitting his failure. But as he turned, his eyes met the girl outside again. She was no longer just observing. There was a fierce determination on her small face. With a decided movement, she pushed open the heavy glass door. A golden bell jingled, announcing her entry. The girl couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She wore a faded pink coat with a visible patch on the elbow, and worn shoes that looked like they'd walked many streets. In her hands, she tightly clutched a small cloth bag, the kind grandmothers might use for groceries. She marched straight to the counter, completely ignoring the luxury around her, her deep, serious brown eyes fixed first on the bear, then on Celeste. "Excuse me," she said, her voice surprisingly clear and firm for someone so small. Celeste looked at the child as if she were an insect that had landed on her pristine display. "Yes, if you're here to ask for something, this isn't the place." The disdain in her voice was palpable. The girl was not intimidated. "I didn't come to ask. I came to buy." She raised her chin, a gesture of defiance that made Arthur stop, his hand already on the doorknob. He watched the scene, paralyzed by a mixture of curiosity and astonishment. The child placed her cloth bag on the polished marble counter. The sound was a soft clinking of coins. "How much is the bear?" she asked, pointing her finger at the object of Laura's desire. Celeste let out a scoffing laugh. "More than you have there, sweetie. This isn't a place for people like you." Arthur felt a wave of fury. The woman's arrogance was venomous. He took a step forward, ready to intervene, to defend the small stranger, even without being able to defend himself. But the girl was faster. She untied the knot of her bag and poured its contents onto the counter. A small mountain of coins of all denominations, quarters, dimes, nickels, pennies, mixed with a few crumpled dollar bills and neatly folded fives, spread across the cold surface. It was a child's treasure, savings hoarded with effort and care. It was her entire capital. Then she turned, not to the sales clerk, but to Arthur. Her large, expressive eyes met his, and in them there was no pity, but a disconcerting understanding. She seemed to see past the worn suit, past the humiliation, and directly into the pain of a father who just wanted to see his daughter happy. With a seriousness that contrasted with her age, she pushed the small pile of money toward him and whispered, her words cutting through the tense silence of the store. "Mister, I think this is enough. You can borrow it." Arthur's world stopped spinning. The girl's words, "you can borrow it," hung in the air, heavier than any business deal he'd ever closed. A loan, coming from a child in a patched coat, offering a treasure of crumpled coins and bills. The humiliation he'd felt moments before transformed into something different, something deeper and more disconcerting. It was the shame of his own helplessness, reflected in the unexpected strength of that small figure. He opened his mouth to refuse, to say it was absurd that an adult couldn't accept such a thing. Pride, that blight that had led him to ruin, still whispered in his ear. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw a seriousness that disarmed him. She wasn't offering charity, she was offering a solution, as an equal. "No, I can't," he managed to say, his voice choked. "It's yours. You saved it for a long time." The girl shook her head, a small, firm gesture. "It's for your daughter. She wants the bear. I saw the way you looked at it." Ignoring Arthur, she turned to Celeste, who was watching the scene with an expression of pure disgust and disbelief. With her nimble little hands, the girl began to separate the coins into small piles on the counter. The metallic sound was the only thing breaking the awkward silence that had fallen over the store. The elegant couple stopped feigning interest in the dollhouse and openly stared. Celeste crossed her arms. "This will take forever, and I doubt it'll be close to the price." But the girl continued, impassive. She counted softly, almost to herself, pushing the coins with her index finger. There was a dignity in her gesture, a concentration that transformed the luxury store's counter into a sacred altar of sacrifice. Arthur felt like an intruder in his own drama, a spectator to his own salvation, orchestrated by a child he didn't even know. Finally, the last coin was counted. The girl looked at the price tag on the bear, then at the small fortune she had spread out. With surprising precision, she pushed the exact amount towards Celeste. A single half-dollar coin remained, which she tucked back into her cloth bag. Celeste looked at the money with disdain, but she couldn't refuse. Reluctantly, she took the money and put it in the register, her face contorted into a mask of resentment. Then, with a brusque motion, she bagged the Melody Bear in a shiny paper bag and pushed it across the counter. The girl took the bag, which was almost her size. She turned to Arthur, her face solemn, and extended the package. He hesitated, his hands trembling. Accepting that gift seemed the greatest defeat of his life, and at the same time, the most sacred gesture he had ever witnessed. When his fingers touched the bag, the girl leaned closer and, in a whisper meant only for him, said the words that would break him into 1,000 pieces. "I really wanted these toys once. I know how it hurts, but I can live without it. It's okay." She released the bag and Tin, without waiting for a thank you, turned and walked toward the door. Arthur stood there, paralyzed, holding the bear. The weight of the toy in his hands was unbearable. Her words echoed in his soul, exposing the poverty of his spirit against the immense richness of that child's heart. He watched her push open the glass door, ready to disappear back into the cold street, carrying with her a lesson worth more than his entire former empire. A sudden panic gripped him. He couldn't let her go. Not like this. "Wait!" he called out, his voice echoing through the silent store. The girl stopped with her hand on the door, turning slowly. There was genuine surprise in her eyes, as if she hadn't expected to be called back. Arthur, still holding the bag with the bear, took a few hurried steps toward her, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt clumsy, a giant stumbling through a world of delicate emotions he'd forgotten how to navigate. The elegant couple now feigned interest in a jigsaw puzzle, but their furtive glances left no doubt they were fully absorbed in the scene. Celeste, meanwhile, watched from behind the counter, her face a mix of irritation and curiosity. I don't know your name," Arthur said, his voice a little steadier now. He needed to anchor that interaction in something real, something more than an anonymous act of kindness. "It's Sophia," she replied, her voice low but clear. "Sophia, my name is Arthur, and this bear is for my daughter, Laura." He knelt down, bringing himself to her level, a movement that seemed to surprise her. Up close, he could see the dust on her cheeks and a small scratch on her forehead. They were the signs of a childhood lived outdoors, far from the plush carpets and manicured gardens where Laura played. "Sophia, what you did, I will never forget, but I need to give you your money back. I'll figure it out. I can get some dollars tomorrow. Maybe." He was rambling, his mind racing to find a solution that would save his wounded pride. He couldn't just accept a child's generosity. It was an inversion of the natural order of things, a debt his spirit couldn't bear. Sophia shook her head, a flicker of impatience crossing her face. "It's not a real loan," she said, as if explaining something very simple to a very slow adult. "It's a gift. For your daughter. She'll be happy." "But what about you?" Arthur insisted. "It was your money, your savings. You must have saved it for something special." A shadow passed across Sophia's eyes, a fleeting glimpse of an unfulfilled wish. It lasted only a second, but Arthur saw it. She glanced at a porcelain doll in a display case with a blue silk dress and tiny shoes. The look was quick, almost imperceptible, before she composed herself and met his eyes again. "I'm fine," she said, with a conviction he hadn't felt in months. "My mom says other people's happiness counts as profit for us too." That phrase, spoken with such simplicity, struck Arthur with the force of a punch. Profit. He had spent his entire life measuring success in terms of profit, dividends, stock value, and here was a little girl who probably had never heard of the stock market, teaching him the true meaning of the word. Moved by an impulse he didn't understand, he asked, "Where do you live, Sophia? I need to thank your mother for having such an incredible daughter." A flash of hesitation appeared on her face. "We live nearby, on Maplewood Lane." "I know it," Arthur said, a knot forming in his throat. Maplewood Lane was on the other side of town, an area known for its modest homes and the struggles of its residents. It was a universe away from his Parkview penthouse. "Can I drive you home?" "It's getting late." Sophia seemed to ponder the offer. "I know the way, and my mum doesn't like me talking to strangers." "I'm not a stranger now. We're partners," Arthur said, attempting a smile. The word felt strange on his lips, but it seemed to work. A small smile formed at the corner of Sophia's mouth. "Okay, but only to the corner." In that moment, Arthur made a decision. It wasn't just about returning the money. It was about understanding. He needed to know more about this girl and the mother who had taught him about a kind of wealth he had never known. He needed to uncover the story behind that act of pure compassion, for he felt, with an overwhelming certainty, that the answer to his own redemption was somehow tied to that child. As they left the store, leaving Celeste's furious gaze behind, Arthur didn't notice the sales clerk grab her phone. Typing rapidly, she sent a message to a contact saved as Eyes and Ears. The message was short and venomous. "Arthur Hayes. Card declined. Needed a handout from a street kid to buy a toy. He's more broke than we thought." The walk with Sophia was silent at first. The cool afternoon air enveloped them, and the city's constant hum seemed distant. Arthur, accustomed to chauffeurs and armored cars, felt the concrete sidewalk beneath the soles of his expensive shoes in a new, uncomfortable way. Beside him, Sophia walked with quick, rhythmic steps, her worn shoes making a soft sound. She didn't seem intimidated or uncomfortable. On the contrary, she observed everything around her with keen curiosity, as if every storefront and every passing face held a story. "Your mother, does she work?" Arthur asked, breaking the silence. He needed to fill the void with information, to piece together the puzzle of that family. "Yes," Sophia replied, without hesitation. "She has 3 jobs. In the morning, she cleans an office. In the afternoon, she's a waitress at a diner. And at night, she sews for a rich lady who owns a dress shop. 3 jobs." The information landed on Arthur like an anvil. He remembered complaining to his assistant when he had more than 2 important meetings in a single day. The life that woman led was a daily battle for survival, a constant struggle he, in all his former opulence, could never have imagined. And yet, she had raised a daughter who was willing to donate her savings to a stranger. "She must be very tired," Arthur said, the words coming out almost as a whisper. "Sometimes," Sophia admitted, "but she always makes time to tell me a story before I sleep. She says stories are like gold. They don't take up space and they're worth a lot." The simplicity of that wisdom was overwhelming. Arthur thought of the nights he came home to find Laura already asleep, or times he was so consumed by the stress of his collapsing businesses that he barely managed a decent good night. He'd been providing material goods, but neglecting the real treasure. They reached the corner of Maplewood Lane. It was a narrow street, lined with small, colorful houses, some with peeling paint and makeshift gardens in tin pots. A scrawny dog slept on the sun-drenched sidewalk. "This is where I get off," Sophia said, pointing to a light blue house at the end of the street. "Thanks for the company, Mr. Hayes. Please, call me Arthur." He knelt again, feeling an urgency to prolong the conversation. "Sophia, I want to make you a proposition. I need to give you your money back. How about I do some odd jobs for you? I can fix things, carry heavy stuff, anything." He was desperate to rebalance the scales, to transform his debt into something that could be repaid with effort, not just money he didn't possess. Sophia looked at him with an amused expression, as if he'd told a funny joke. "You, fixing things?" The innocence of the question struck him squarely. She was right. What did he know how to do besides analyze spreadsheets and close deals? "I'm a quick study," he insisted. She smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. "Okay, if you insist. Our gate hinge is broken. Mom tried to fix it, but she couldn't." Arthur nodded, grateful. "It's a deal. I'll come tomorrow." "What time?" "In the morning. Mom's home on Saturday morning." With that, she turned and ran down the street, her small figure disappearing into the blue house. Arthur stood there, rooted to the corner, feeling like a complete stranger in his own world. He looked at the bag in his hand. That bear now represented much more than a gift. It was a symbol of his failure and paradoxically a beacon of hope. Returning home, the image of Sophia and her modest life wouldn't leave his head. The dignity of that family, the richness of spirit they possessed amidst material scarcity, was a brutal contrast to the emptiness he felt in his luxurious penthouse. He knew, with a painful clarity, that the humiliation in the store hadn't been the lowest point of his life. The lowest point was the realization of how truly poor he was, even when he considered himself a multimillionaire. And he also knew that the journey to fix Sophia's gate would be the first step in rebuilding something far more important than his financial empire himself. The next morning, the sun streamed through the panoramic windows of Arthur's penthouse, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The view, which once brought him a sense of power and accomplishment, now seemed only a reminder of the height of his fall. Laura sat on the Persian rug, clutching the melody bear. The smile on her face was radiant, a pure light amidst the darkness that enveloped Arthur's life. She squeezed the bear's paw repeatedly, and the soft lullaby filled the silence of the apartment. "Daddy, he's perfect," she said, running to hug his legs. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Arthur forced a smile, his heart heavy with a mix of joy and guilt. His daughter's happiness had been bought with another child's savings. That thought was a constant weight on his conscience. "I'm glad you like him, my love." He looked at the clock. It was time to keep his promise. He changed out of his suit into old jeans and a t-shirt, clothes he hadn't worn in years. Looking in the mirror, he saw a stranger. The man who once commanded a business empire now looked like a simple laborer with soft, clean hands that had never held a tool. He found an old, dusty toolbox from the back of a closet, a gift from his father he had never used. He felt like an imposter, but the image of Sophia's determined face spurred him on. On Maplewood Lane, the scene was entirely different. The air smelled of fresh coffee and baking bread somewhere. Children played in the street, and neighbors chatted over low fences. Arthur felt out of place, an observer of a genuine community he had never known in his luxury condo. He stopped in front of the blue house. The wooden gate was, indeed, hanging precariously from a single rusty hinge. He took a deep breath and knocked. The door was opened by a tired-looking woman with kind, bright eyes, Sophia's eyes. She wore an apron over a simple dress, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft, but with a hint of caution. Elena frowned, confused. "Sophia, what did she do?" "She did the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen," Arthur said. "She helped me in a difficult moment." Sophia appeared behind her mother, a shy smile on her face. "Mom, this is the man from the bear." The confusion on Elena's face transformed into understanding, followed by a wave of embarrassment. "Oh my goodness, sir, I'm so sorry. Sophia shouldn't have. She knows not to touch her money. I'll pay you back every cent. I promise, maybe in installments." "No, please," Arthur interrupted, raising his hands. "That's not why I'm here. I insisted. I promised her I'd fix the gate in return. It's a business deal." He tried to sound confident, but felt like a complete amateur. Elena studied him for a moment, the distrust in her eyes warring with the sincerity she saw in his. Finally, she relented with a sigh. "Okay, please come in. But I can't pay you for this." "The payment's already been made," Arthur said, looking at Sophia. He spent the next few hours wrestling with the gate. The tools felt like alien objects in his hands. He hammered his finger, sweated under the morning sun, and felt muscles he didn't know existed protest. Elena and Sophia watched him from the window, first with curiosity, then with contained amusement. At one point, Elena came out with a glass of iced water. You don't seem to have much knack for this," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's my first investment in manual labor," Arthur admitted, wiping sweat from his brow. The returns seemed low so far. Despite the difficulty, there was something profoundly satisfying about the task. The creak of metal, the smell of rust, the dust on his hands. It was all real, tangible, unlike the abstract figures and stock charts that had dominated his life. Finally, after almost 2 hours, the gate was in place, opening and closing smoothly. It wasn't perfect work, but it was done. He felt a pang of pride that no multi-million-dollar transaction had ever given him. As he was packing up his tools, a luxury car pulled up to the curb. A man in a suit stepped out, his face familiar. It was Marcus Thorne, one of his most impatient creditors. "Arthur, I knew I'd find you if I followed the stench of desperation," Marcus said, his voice loud and full of scorn, ensuring everyone on the street could hear. "Doing odd jobs to pay off your debts? How pathetic. The deadline is up, Arthur. Your house is next." Marcus's presence on Maplewood Lane was like an oil slick on clear water. His arrogant voice sliced through the morning's tranquility, and the neighbors, who had been chatting amicably, now watched with a mix of curiosity and pity. Arthur felt the blood rush to his face. The same humiliation from the toy store returning with full force, but this time, in front of the family, he so desperately wanted to impress. Elena emerged from the house, her face worried, placing a protective hand on Sophia's shoulder. Sophia watched the scene with wide eyes. "Mr. Hayes, is everything all right?" Elena asked in a low voice. Arthur couldn't answer. Marcus's words paralyzed him. His house, the last refuge, the only place where Laura could still have a semblance of normalcy. The threat of losing it was a physical blow, stealing his breath. "Nothing to say, Hayes," Marcus continued, savoring every moment. "Are your speeches about visionary investments and the future of the market all dried up? The future is here, and it looks like you're in it, fixing old gates. My interest isn't paid with handyman work." Arthur clenched his fists, rage and impotence warring within him. He wanted to scream, to lash out, but knew any reaction would only fuel the spectacle. He was a caged lion, and Marcus was the cruel handler, poking him with a stick. It was then that something unexpected happened. Sophia, who had been partly hidden behind her mother, stepped forward. "Leave him alone," she said, her voice small but surprisingly authoritative. Marcus looked at her, first with surprise, then with cruel amusement. Well, well. The bankrupt man's found himself a pint-sized lawyer. "What are you going to do, little girl? Pay me with your piggy bank money." The mention of the coins was like a dagger to Arthur's heart. He didn't know how Marcus could know about that, but the violation of such an intimate and sacred moment filled him with cold fury. Before he could react, Elena intervened. "Sir, please leave. This is a private matter," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "When I'm just collecting what's rightfully mine," Marcus retorted, taking a threatening step forward. Suddenly, the door of the neighboring house opened. A large, strong man with grease-stained hands emerged. "Everything all right here, Elena?" Another neighbor appeared at a window. In seconds, a small group of residents had gathered on the sidewalk, watching Marcus with hostile glances. They didn't know Arthur, but they knew Elena and Sophia. And on this street, messing with one was messing with all. Marcus, realizing his audience was no longer admirers of his cruelty, but protectors of his victim, backed down. He adjusted his suit, casting one last venomous look at Arthur. "This isn't over, Hayes. The clock is ticking." With that, he got into his car and drove off, leaving a trail of tension and exhaust fumes. The ensuing silence was broken by the sound of quiet sobbing. Arthur turned and saw Sophia with her face buried in her mother's dress, her small shoulders shaking. He approached, his heart aching. "Sophia, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to bring trouble to your doorstep." Elena stroked her daughter's hair. "It's not your fault. People like him feed on the suffering of others." She looked up at Arthur, and in her eyes he saw a new understanding. The businessman facade had crumbled, and what remained was just a desperate father, just like so many others on that street. In that instant, something shifted. The dynamic of benefactor and beneficiary dissolved. They were just three people from different worlds, united by a common enemy and shared vulnerability. Later that same day, Arthur's phone rang. It was his ex-wife, Valerie. Her voice was cold as ice. "Arthur, I heard what happened. A public embarrassment. And now I'm told you're associating with low-class people, putting our daughter at risk. I just got a call from an attorney. He says I have solid grounds to file for full custody of Laura. Consider yourself served." Arthur dropped the phone. His world was crumbling, and the last thing he had left, his daughter's love, was about to be ripped away from him. The double blow left Arthur reeling. First, the threat of losing his home. Now, the possibility of losing his daughter. His luxurious penthouse, which once seemed a symbol of security, now closed in on him like a tomb. He paced back and forth, his mind a whirlwind of panic and despair. Valerie, his ex-wife, had always been pragmatic. Their marriage had been more a merger of interests than a union of hearts. When his fortune evaporated, so did her interest. But he never imagined she would use Laura as a weapon. The accusation of associating with low-class people filled him with bitter rage. Elena and Sophia, with their dignity and kindness, were richer in character than anyone he had known in his social circles. The next day, a process server visited him, delivering the custody papers. The petition was rife with venomous accusations: financial instability, unsuitable environment, questionable associations. It was a calculated attack to destroy him. His former lawyers, who once courted him, now demanded exorbitant fees he couldn't afford. He was alone. Amidst the chaos, his thoughts turned to Elena and Sophia. He felt guilty for dragging them into his mess. He decided to go to their house, perhaps to apologize, perhaps just to seek some of the calm and strength that emanated from them. He found Elena sitting on her small front porch, mending a waitress uniform. Her face was etched with worry. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice tired. "I heard a neighbor who works at the courthouse heard your name. I'm so sorry." "No, Elena. I am," he said, sitting on the concrete step. "I brought my problems to your doorstep. That accusation of questionable associations, it's about you. They're using my friendship with your family against me." Elena stopped sewing. The needle suspended in the air. An expression of hurt and indignation crossed her face. "They dare. They call us questionable because we're poor. To them, poverty is a character flaw," Arthur said, bitterness evident in his voice. "It's a world I knew well, but only now truly understand its cruelty." Sophia emerged from the house holding a notebook and a pencil. She seemed to have overheard the conversation. There was a seriousness on her face that contrasted with her age. She sat beside Arthur, silently, and began to draw. They sat like that for a while. The sound of Elena's needle passing through fabric and Sophia's pencil scratching on paper, creating a strange sense of peace amidst the storm. "I'm going to lose everything, Elena," Arthur confessed, his voice broken. "My home, my daughter, everything I fought for." "You fought for money and business," Elena said, without looking up from her mending. "Perhaps now it's time to fight for something money can't buy." Her words were simple, but they contained a profound truth that struck him to his core. He looked at Sophia. She had stopped drawing and was watching him with her large, intelligent eyes. "You know, Mr. Hayes," she said suddenly, "when my piggy bank breaks, I don't throw away the pieces, I glue them back together. It looks different with the marks, but it can still hold coins. Sometimes it's even stronger." She went back to her drawing. Arthur looked at her notebook. She wasn't drawing flowers or houses like most children. She was drawing a complex gear with unique interlocking parts. "What is this, Sophia?" he asked, curious. "It's an idea," she said, offering no further details. That night, Sophia's idea of the broken piggy bank wouldn't leave Arthur's mind, gluing the pieces back together, rebuilding, becoming stronger in the broken places. He began to think about his business, the empire that had crumbled. It had been built on the premise of relentless growth, of profits at any cost. Perhaps that's why it broke so easily. What if he tried to rebuild it differently, a way that would be like Sophia's piggy bank, stronger precisely because of the cracks? A thought began to form, vague and uncertain, but it was the first spark of hope he'd felt in months. The next day, however, reality hit him again. Elena sought him out, her face pale with anguish. "Arthur, I lost my job at the diner. The manager said some wealthy clients, friends of your ex-wife, complained. They said they didn't want to be served by someone who associates with a bankrupt person. They humiliated me in front of everyone." Valerie's war wasn't just against him, it was a scorched earth campaign designed to isolate him and destroy anyone who offered him support. The news of Elena's dismissal was a punch to Arthur's gut. Guilt weighed on him like a lead cloak. His downfall was dragging innocent people into the abyss. He looked at Elena's worn face, at the hands that worked tirelessly and now had one less source of income, and felt a wave of impotent fury. He was the multimillionaire, the business genius, but he couldn't protect an honest, hard-working woman from the pettiness of a world he himself had helped build. "Elena, this is my fault," he said, his voice raw. "I'm going to fix this. I'll talk to the manager. No," she interrupted, her voice firm despite the pain in her eyes. "That would only make things worse. It would fuel the gossip. You need to focus on fighting for your daughter. We'll be fine. I still have 2 jobs. We'll manage." Her resilience was both inspiring and painful. She refused to be a victim, even as the world conspired against her. This strength, however, only deepened Arthur's sense of responsibility. He couldn't simply accept the situation. The debt he felt toward that family grew each day, transforming from a financial obligation into a profound moral commitment. That afternoon, while Laura took a nap, Arthur sat at his mahogany desk, surrounded by collection notices and letters from lawyers. He felt cornered, with no way out. His assets were frozen, his capital non-existent, and his reputation, the most valuable asset in the business world, was in tatters. It was then that his gaze fell upon a crumpled piece of paper that had been in his pocket since his visit to Elena. It was a page from Sophia's notebook, which she had given him before he left. "It's for good luck," she had said. He uncrumpled the paper. It was the drawing of a gear, but now, looking more closely, he saw it wasn't just a gear, it was a system. Several gears of different sizes, interconnected, Beside them were small drawings, a teddy bear, a loaf of bread, a needle and thread, a book, and at the center of it all, a large gear with a heart drawn on it. He didn't understand at first. It looked like a child's doodle. But then Sophia's phrase returned to his mind. It's an idea. He forced himself to look at the drawing not as a cynical adult, but with the open mind of a child. The teddy bear, the toy store, the bread, the diner, the needle, Elena's sewing work, the book, education. The gears were connected, one moved the other, and the heart in the center, compassion, community. Arthur felt a shiver. The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. What if, instead of a business focused solely on one product, he created a system, an ecosystem of small local businesses that supported each other? The toy store could donate a percentage of profits to an educational fund. The diner could use ingredients from local producers, who would in turn buy from the store. The sewing service could mend uniforms. It was a network, a cash flow that not only generated profit but also strengthened the community. He laughed, a dry, incredulous sound. The answer to revitalizing his businesses, an innovative idea his Harvard consultants would never have conceived, came from the drawing of a 6-year-old girl who lived on Maplewood Lane. His pride, however, was still a barrier. Accept a business idea from a child, a poor child, no less. The financial world would mock him. It would be the final nail in his professional coffin. He shook his head, dismissing the idea as a reverie, a product of his desperation. It was ingenious but impractical, childish. He folded the paper and put it back in the drawer. He needed a real solution, a solid business plan, not a dream drawn in pencil. The next day, he went to meet an old contact, an investor who, perhaps out of pity or some forgotten loyalty, might offer him a loan. The meeting was at a sophisticated coffee shop. While waiting, he saw Celeste, the toy store employee, sitting at a corner table. She was chatting animatedly with Richard, his biggest competitor, the man who had benefited most from his downfall. Celeste handed Richard a small envelope. He smiled and slipped it into his jacket pocket. They didn't see him. Arthur felt a chill down his spine. That encounter wasn't a coincidence. The humiliation at the store, the information his creditors and ex-wife seemed to have, everything began to click into place in a terrible way. And he realized that the battle he was fighting was far dirtier and more complex than he had imagined. The scene in the coffee shop left Arthur stunned. The conversation between Celeste and Richard wasn't just suspicious, it was a revelation. He wasn't merely a businessman who made bad decisions, he was a target. His difficulties weren't mere misfortunes, they were ammunition used by his enemies. The toy store employee wasn't just prejudiced, she was an informant, systematically reporting his vulnerabilities to sabotage any chance of recovery. The humiliation he suffered wasn't a random event. It was a piece of competitive intelligence. The rage he felt was cold and precise. Despair began to give way to a chilling determination. If they were going to play dirty, he needed to be smarter. He cancelled the meeting with the investor. Asking for help from anyone in his old circle would be useless. Word of his request would likely reach Richard's ears in a matter of hours. He was completely isolated in the world he once dominated. Returning home, he opened the drawer and retrieved Sophia's drawing again. He looked at the interconnected gears, at the heart in the center. The idea that had once seemed childish and naive now felt like the only weapon he possessed. It was a plan no one would expect. It was so outside the box, so different from the aggressive, predatory strategies of the market, that it might be his only chance to catch his adversaries by surprise. The pride that prevented him from considering a child's idea crumbled under the weight of the betrayal he had just witnessed. His enemies used ruthlessness as an advantage. He would use compassion as his strategy. It was a daring gamble, perhaps the biggest of his life. He spent the following days immersed in work, not in his former penthouse, but at a small table in the public library, where internet access was free. He used what remained of his business acumen to transform Sophia's drawing into a viable plan. He researched solidarity economy, cooperativism, and social impact businesses. He discovered a new business vocabulary with words like sustainability, community, and shared value. The concept took shape. A holding company that would invest in small local businesses, creating a network of mutual support. The heart's gear, as he dubbed it. Profit would not be the sole objective. Positive social impact would carry equal weight. He presented the idea to Elena, not as a business plan, but as a conversation. What if we could create our own jobs right here in the neighborhood? He asked. A small diner that buys bread from the corner bakery, whose employees have lunch there. A seamstress who makes uniforms for everyone. Elena's eyes lit up. Not with the prospect of wealth, but of dignity and autonomy. It would be a dream, she said. But where would the money to start come from? That's the challenge, Arthur admitted. But I have a plan. The subplot unfolding parallel to his efforts was the blossoming friendship between Laura and Sophia. Arthur started bringing Laura to Maplewood Lane. The two girls, from such different worlds, became inseparable. Laura, who had grown up in a sterile environment of solitary luxury, was fascinated by the vibrant community life of Sophia's neighborhood. They played hopscotch on the sidewalk, created stories with rocks and leaves, and shared secrets. For Laura, Sophia was the sister she never had. For Sophia, Laura was a window into a world she only saw in storefronts. This friendship became an immense source of joy for Arthur, but also an overwhelming pressure. He now had two girls looking at him, expecting him to fix the world. Failure was no longer an option. One evening, while the girls played in Elena's small backyard, Sophia approached Arthur. "I know who you are," she said quietly. "Mom used to have a picture from her old job. You were the big boss, the one who fired everyone." Arthur felt the air leave his lungs. Elena had never said a word. She had welcomed him, helped him, even though he was the man who, indirectly, had caused some of her difficulties by laying off her late husband, George, a loyal employee, during the cutbacks that preceded his own downfall. "My mum didn't tell you," Sophia continued, "because she said the past shouldn't poison the present, and that you're not that man anymore." The weight of that revelation was crushing. Elena had known all along. Her kindness wasn't naive. It was a conscious choice to forgive and to see the man he could become. Not the failure he was. Her generosity wasn't ignorance. It was grace. Arthur felt a wave of shame so overwhelming it nearly brought him to his knees. He sought Elena, finding her in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner. The aroma of garlic and onions filled the air, a scent of home that violently contrasted with the emptiness of his own house. "Elena, he began, his voice failing him. "I just found out about your husband. I had no idea he worked for me." "I'm so sorry." He expected anger, accusation, resentment. Instead, she turned, dried her hands on her apron, and looked at him with her calm, wise eyes. "I know you didn't, Arthur. Those were tough times for everyone. My husband, George, he always said you were a fair man, but under a lot of pressure, he never held a grudge." Her absolution was almost harder to bear than condemnation. The absence of bitterness in her voice made the weight of Arthur's past actions even heavier. He had laid off a good man, a loyal man, and his family had paid the price. That moment solidified his determination. The heart's gear. Project was no longer just a business strategy to save himself. It became a mission of reparation. It was his only way to honor George's memory and Eleanor's kindness. His adversaries, however, weren't sleeping. Richard, Sensing Arthur might be planning something intensified his offensive. He had somehow uncovered the essence of the heart's gear idea. Perhaps Celeste had overheard something, or perhaps Richard's corporate intelligence was simply relentless. He approached Elena directly. He offered her a life-changing sum of money, enough to buy a house, pay for Sophia's education, live without the constant worry of bills. In return, he wanted her to sign a consulting contract, handing over Arthur's business secrets, disguised as community development ideas. Essentially, he was trying to buy Sophia's idea through her mother's desperation. Elena, shaken but unshakable in her integrity, refused. But the offer left her scared. She realized the depths Richard was willing to plumb. The war had reached her doorstep. As if that weren't enough, social pressure mounted. An anonymous complaint was made to Child Protective Services. Social workers began visiting Arthur, questioning his emotional and financial stability. The complaint specifically mentioned his improper friendship with a needy family, insinuating that he might be taking advantage of their situation in some way. It was a dirty tactic designed to undermine his credibility in custody court and paint him as an unfit father. The pressure became unbearable. Sophia, with the keen intuition of a child who had lived more than her age suggested, felt the tension. She began to withdraw. She saw the social workers, heard the neighbors' whispers, and understood in her childlike way that her presence in Arthur and Laura's lives was causing problems. One day, Arthur found her sitting alone on the swing set at the neighborhood park. "What's wrong, little partner?" he asked, sitting beside her. "And I think maybe Laura and I shouldn't be friends anymore," she said, not looking at him, her feet dangling inches from the ground. "Every time we're together, bad people show up. I don't want you to lose Laura because of me." Arthur's heart broke. His enemies weren't just trying to steal his ideas or his assets. They were trying to steal the innocence and friendship of two children. They were poisoning the only pure thing left in his world. He knelt in front of her, taking her small hands. "Sophia, look at me. Your friendship is the strongest thing I have right now. It's proof that I'm doing the right thing. I won't let them win. We won't let them." But as he spoke the words, a cold doubt settled in his heart. Was he being selfish? Was he dragging that family into a hurricane to save himself? The line between fighting for them and using them in his battle was becoming dangerously thin. Arthur's world had become a battlefield on multiple fronts. The threat of losing Laura's custody loomed like a storm cloud. Social workers made regular visits, and the court date approached dangerously. Creditors, led by Marcus Thorne, tightened their noose, and the auction of his penthouse was set. Amidst all this, the Heart's Gear project was his only fragile line of hope, an idea born of innocence that he desperately tried to turn into reality. He had achieved the unthinkable, using his last reliable contacts and presenting a business plan so innovative and socially conscious. He attracted the interest of a small ethical investment fund. It wasn't a giant financial bailout, but seed capital, enough to take the first step to prove the concept worked. The plan was to start small, acquire a local diner on the verge of bankruptcy, and transform it into the network's first hub, employing Elena as manager. It would be a symbolic and practical victory, a beacon of hope. Richard, however, was always one step ahead. Using Celeste's privileged information, he found out about the investment fund and the diner. In a swift and brutal move, he bought the small establishment before Arthur could. And then he made Arthur an offer that was both a lifeline and a poison. He summoned Arthur to a meeting in his imposing office, the same place where Arthur, years before, had refused a merger proposal from Richard, an act that marked the beginning of their rivalry. Power had now dramatically shifted hands. "Arthur, Arthur," Richard said, with a predatory smile, "I admire your tenacity. This business with a heart idea is quaint, almost brought a tear to my eye." He leaned across the polished glass table. "But the real world doesn't work with children's drawings. I know about your fun deal. I know about your custody hearing. I know you're one step away from the abyss." The offer came next, precise and cruel. Richard offered to buy a majority stake in the Heart's Gear, providing Arthur with enough capital to save his house, silence the creditors, and present an image of financial stability in court. He could retain a symbolic position, a small percentage of shares. He would save his own skin. He would have a chance to keep Laura. "There's just one condition," Richard added, savoring the moment. "The manager of the first unit, the diner, Mrs. Elena, she doesn't fit our company profile. We need someone with more experience. She'll have to be let go immediately." The dilemma was diabolical. It was the climax of his entire journey. Accepting the offer meant betraying the only person who had shown him unconditional kindness. The woman whose family he had indirectly harmed in the past, and who had become the inspiration for his redemption. It meant transforming the Heart's Gear into precisely the kind of predatory business he was trying to fight. It meant selling his soul to save his life. Refusing, on the other hand, meant certain ruin. He would lose his house. His reputation would be permanently destroyed. And, most devastating of all, he would likely lose custody of Laura. The court would see only a bankrupt, unstable man, unable to provide for his daughter. He would be a father who chose integrity over his child's well-being. The decision tore him in two. In his mind, he saw Laura's face, her smile, her fear of losing him. And he saw Elena's face, her kind eyes, her quiet strength. And he saw Sophia, who believed he could glue the pieces back together and make things stronger. What kind of man would he be? What would he teach his daughter about the world? That one must sacrifice others to survive, or that some principles are worth more than any assets? He looked at Richard, at the triumphant smile on his face, and knew his answer would define not only his future, but who he fundamentally was as a human being. The silence in the office was absolute, the weight of two families, two futures, resting on a single word. Arthur looked into Richard's eyes, and in the triumphant gleam of his rival, he found his answer. It wasn't a logical decision based on spreadsheets or profit projections. It was a choice that came from the deepest place within him, the place Eleanor and Sophia had reawakened. He took a deep breath, the weight of the world on his shoulders, and a strange sense of peace washed over him. "No," he said, his voice firm and clear, echoing in the silent office. "My answer is no." Richard's smile faltered, replaced by genuine incredulity. "You're throwing everything away, your house, your daughter, for a waitress." "I'm choosing the kind of world I want my daughter to grow up in," Arthur replied, standing up. "A world where loyalty and decency are worth more than your money." He turned and walked out, leaving Richard stunned. As he left the building, he didn't feel defeated. For the first time in a long time, he felt free. He had lost the battle for his old empire, but he had won the war for his soul. The custody hearing was the next day. Arthur arrived feeling exhausted but resolute. He had no expensive lawyers, just the truth. Valerie was there with her legal team, looking confident and victorious. Her attorney presented the case mercilessly. Arthur's debts, the loss of his home, the report to Child Protective Services, the destabilizing influence of his friendship with Elena and Sophia. It seemed a lost cause. When it was Arthur's turn to speak, he offered no excuses or elaborate defenses. He spoke from the heart. He recounted the story of the past few months, the humiliation at the store, Sophia's kindness, Elena's dignity. He admitted his financial failures, his pride, and his mistakes. "I lost a fortune, Your Honor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I gained something far more valuable. I learned that being a father isn't about the net worth I can offer, but about the values I can teach. I learned from a family that has very little, but gave me the greatest wealth of all." The lesson of compassion. If financial stability is the sole criterion, then I have failed. But if love, integrity, and the ability to raise a decent human being count, then I ask you to consider me the richest father in the world." When he finished, a profound silence fell over the courtroom. Then a figure rose in the back. It was Elena. She hadn't been called as a witness, but she asked permission to speak. In a calm voice full of dignity, she spoke about the Arthur she had come to know, the man who fixed her gate, who treated her daughter with respect, who was trying to build something new and better from the ashes of his life. She refuted the claims of being a bad influence, describing how the friendship between the two girls had enriched both their lives. The judge, an experienced woman whose eyes had seen everything, listened intently. The decision came at the end of the day. She acknowledged Arthur's financial difficulties, but also noted the profound transformation in his character. She granted joint custody with one condition: that Arthur continue to demonstrate progress in his stabilization, and that the children's friendship be encouraged as a positive factor in social development. It was a monumental victory. Arthur didn't retain full custody, but he didn't lose it either. He left the courthouse with Laura holding his hand, feeling triumphant. Later that same day, the Ethical Investment Fund, learning of Richard's hostile takeover attempt and Arthur's refusal, was deeply impressed by his integrity. They not only maintained their commitment, but decided to increase the initial investment. "We don't just invest in ideas, Mr. Hayes," the director said. "We invest in people. And you've proven to be the kind of person we want to associate with." With the new capital, Arthur bypassed Richard's blockade. Instead of buying the diner, he leased an empty storefront on the same street and began building the first Heart's Gear from scratch. With Elena as a partner, not just a manager, the Maplewood Lane community rallied around them. The mechanic neighbor helped with electrical installation, others painted walls. It was a communal effort, the living embodiment of Sophia's idea. The recovery would be slow, arduous, but it would be real and built on a solid foundation of values. The final victory, however, came from an unexpected source. Celeste, the store employee, seeing her name and Richard's mentioned in some custody court documents, and fearing legal repercussions for corporate espionage, decided to protect herself. She sought out Arthur, offering to testify against Richard in exchange for immunity. She handed over copies of messages, payments, everything. With this evidence in hand, Arthur didn't seek revenge. He scheduled one last meeting with Richard, not to threaten him, but to offer him a deal that would change everything. The final meeting between Arthur and Richard didn't take place in a luxury office, but on a park bench, halfway between the financial district and Maplewood Lane. It was neutral territory for two men whose worlds had collided so spectacularly. Arthur arrived first, feeling the morning sun on his face. He no longer wore his expensive suits, but simple, comfortable clothes. He didn't look like a defeated businessman, but a man at peace with himself. Richard arrived shortly after June, his face a mask of tension. He expected an ambush, a threat of legal action. Arthur calmly placed a folder on the bench. "No lawyers here, Richard. Just us, and a proposal." Inside the folder were no legal documents, but the complete business plan for the Heart's Gear, along with the evidence Celeste had provided. "You can sue me and probably bankrupt me," Arthur said, "but that wouldn't rebuild your old life. The market has changed, Richard. People are tired of predatory businesses. They want authenticity. They want to feel like their money is doing good." Arthur's proposal was audacious. Instead of destroying Richard, he invited him to invest in the Heart's Gear, not as a controller, but as a silent minority partner. It would be a form of reparation, an investment in a new kind of capitalism, more human and sustainable. Part of Richard's dividends would be directed to an educational fund for needy children, starting with Sophia. Richard was shocked. then skeptical, but as he flipped through the plan, he saw the genius behind its simplicity. He saw a way not just to avoid a scandal, but to reinvent his own image and legacy. Reluctantly, he agreed. 4 weeks after the humiliation at the toy store, Arthur's life was unrecognizable. The penthouse had been sold to pay the most urgent debts, and he and Laura now lived in a comfortable, much smaller apartment, but one filled with warmth and laughter. The diner, christened the Street's Heart, opened with a big neighborhood celebration. Elena, now a proud entrepreneur, ran the kitchen with contagious efficiency and joy. The place quickly became the community's gathering spot. The Heart's gear began to turn. The local bakery supplied the bread, a neighborhood seamstress made the uniforms, and a percentage of each sale went to the educational fund that would secure the future of Sophia and other children like her. Laura and Sophia's friendship was the heart of that new universe. They were living proof that social barriers were merely adult constructs. On a sunny afternoon, Arthur sat at one of the diner's outdoor tables, watching Laura and Sophia play hopscotch on the sidewalk. Eleanor joined him, bringing 2 glasses of fresh juice. "Who would have thought, huh?" she said, smiling. "From a broken gate to all of this." "It was the best transaction of my life," Arthur replied, his eyes fixed on the girls. "I lost almost all my assets, but I found my true wealth." Later, he took both girls to that same upscale toy store. Celeste no longer worked there. A new, kinder manager assisted them. Arthur, with money honestly earned from the diner's first week of operation, bought Sophia the porcelain doll in the blue silk dress she had so desired that first day. Sophia's eyes sparkled, but before accepting, she turned to Arthur. "Are you sure you can, Mr. Hayes? You won't run out." "Never again." "Sophia," he said, kneeling to be at her level, "because you taught me that true fortune isn't what we hoard, but what we share. You taught me to calculate profit in smiles." Arthur Hayes' story became a legend in business circles. The man who lost a billionaire empire to build a business based on a child's kindness. He never recovered his old fortune in dollars or stocks, but he built an invaluable legacy, a united family, a strengthened community, and the knowledge that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters. That afternoon, as the sun set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, the 2 families, one by birth, one by heart, sat together, sharing a simple meal and laughing. The Melody Bear sat on a chair between the 2 girls, a silent guardian of the journey they had all traversed. The businessman who had walked into that store as a broken man discovered that the simplest gesture, a handful of coins offered by a child, could be the investment with the greatest return in the world: redemption.